Hello.
Hey,
So today we have the lesson 3,
lesson three.
and that will be on Dead Sea Scrolls. So affirming the Torah, which is the most important piece of evidence we can show to Muslims.
hmm
And I'm gonna present the PowerPoint.
Yeah, so where we left off last time, um, we went through comparing. Sorry, not comparing. We're going to be doing comparing after this. Um, we looked at what the Quran says about the Torah, and looking at from a Quranic point of view, the Quran affirms the reliability of the Torah in the time of Muhammad in the 7th century. So that's in doing that, we just want to show them what does the Quran actually say and leverage that um, point of view, not because we put any stock in the Quran ourselves, right? We don't. But for Muslims, they do. So helping them to see that the Quran actually affirms it in that time. Not necessarily today, but in that time. But now we're going to mention to them that we have the Dead Sea Scrolls. There are some other manuscripts that's, key finding that we have archaeologically, manuscripts of the Old Testament um, that are partial, they're not complete, and they long predate the time of Muhammad. So this is a point we bring up after we show them what the Quran says about the Torah, so that essentially we don't want um, to affect the way that they're reading the Quran about the Torah, uh, because most of the time they don't know anything about the Dead Sea Scrolls or that we have manuscripts that predate that time. So we just want them to do is be able to hear the Quran say what it has to say without knowing, okay, well, we're going to use this against you, for example. Uh, so, if we had told them about the manuscripts up front, they might not be willing to hear out the Quran really what it's saying more clearly than if we wait till after and talk about it independently. So at this point, basically, we've shown them that. Now we're going to bring up the Dead Sea Scrolls, and I would actually, if you hold on a second, I'm gonna get my own so I can show it. Okay, I've got mine right here, my little booklet, which we're going to talk more about. But so in conversation, after showing them what the Quran says about the Torah, then I'll ask them, okay, so have you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? Okay, and it is really nice when you have something like physical that you can show them, and that is a big part of how we try to do things. Um, but yeah, so that's kind of how the transition is going from talking about the Quran's view of the Torah, and then have you heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls? And if they say yes, then I always follow it up with what have you heard? What have you heard about them? Because they may know nothing, but just have heard about them, or they may have heard a lot of things that are just incorrect, which I've heard.
Strange stuff. Yeah.
Strange, very strange things. Okay, so
We done
uh,
that. Been there, done
we
that.
need to talk a little bit about what the Dead Sea Scrolls are.
Yep.
Um, and we're not going to give them a full lecture on it. We're just going to give them very basic information to enable us to then move on to compare the stories. Because if the Quran affirms the Torah in the time of Muhammad in the 7th century, and we've got manuscripts that predate it, and our modern English Bibles, not the King James, because the King James translation was before the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. So the Dead Sea Scrolls don't inform the manuscripts that are being used by translators until after their discovery, which was in 1940s and following. In fact, they may even continue to be discovering a little bit here and there. So that's how we're going to bring up in conversation. Do you want to go to the slides,
Yes, I
Tyler?
will just pull a slide completely, and we're gonna talk about it. Of course, this lecture will be very extensive. Like again, we give you a lot of interesting part in evidence.
Right?
for you to use once in a while if you feel like you have to convince Muslim a little bit more. But normally, that's what I say. It's archaeological discoveries of the last century, which is like less than 100 years ago.
Yeah.
Confirm that.
Pause on this. Pause on this slide though, because I
Yeah,
want to talk about something too.
sure. The Torah was never corrupted over the last 2,200 years. This is very significant because, as you said, Qur'an came after 700 plus years after the Dead Sea Scrolls were written and hidden in a cave. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if I can just say, so we didn't give the dates yet. So the Dead Sea Scrolls range from about 250 BC to 70 or 180, right? So the 3rd century BC, the 200 BC to the 1st century AD. So that's long before some of the manuscripts we would even be that are basically behind what our conversation would even be from like the 2nd century BC. So even before the time of Jesus and the Christians. And I do want to emphasize, even though we have started the conversation with them and presenting our materials with what does the Quran say about the Torah, obviously, like I said, as Christians, we don't look to the Quran for why we believe the Bible, right? But we need to help them come to the place where they can be open to consider what the Bible says. So we're leveraging the claims that they already have, which is to believe the Quran and what the Quran says. But for us, we believe what we believe because of the factual evidence, the manuscripts, the physical things that we have that give us evidence for it, that corroborate the things that we believe, right? So, in other words, for ourselves, we're going to look more to things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other manuscripts that support what we believe as the reason why we believe it. We don't believe what we're presenting them because the Quran says it. So I just want to make that very clear. That's not why we're going through that. And so for us, we want to emphasize the physical evidence. And so if a Muslim were to somehow push on that, which they rarely do, that's point that you can explain to them is like, look, I don't believe the Quran, but you do. So for me, I look at the manuscripts. That's what's there. Like that's can't be denied what is there. Okay. Yeah, you want to take it from there, Alex, the next one?
Yeah. So now we're talking about that booklet you hold in your hands. That booklet that's what you can see the picture, clear picture here. Mm-hmm. And some of the Dead Sea Scrolls actually they look like that. So we have holes in it, okay, not in a narrative though, but it's in a physical text. But a lot of them still available for us to read and compare. Mm-hmm. And that's the famous page 18 about Genesis on the booklet. It's quite a change everything, right? So if you notice the date here, it's 125 to 100 BCE, so before Christ. It was written. And it said that the copies of Genesis among the Dead Sea Scrolls are extremely similar to the traditional Hebrew text. And this, when I show to the Muslims that part, I mean, they always look and read the page, read these words in the page, and they ponder. And what can you say? It is a factual, physical evidence, and it's not written by Christians or the Jews. It's just simple people who use the text, who study the text, compare the text. Maybe an atheist, who cares? But what they show is physically what they find it and compare it, and there's a conclusion. It doesn't matter what you believe, I believe, he believes, doesn't matter at all. It's simply the fact, stating the fact that the Dead Sea Scrolls, which been in this case, it's like 2,100 and almost 50 years, and today, right? So they are extremely similar, meaning, yes, they have differences, but they are so absolutely irrelevant, especially for the conversation with the Muslims. And I want to play the clip of Shabir Ali, what he said about Dead Sea Scrolls and the Torah in general.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you, and Ramadan Mubarak. I'm your brother in faith, Shabir Ali, speaking to you from the Muslim Media Hub. Two scriptures are very prominent, the Torah and the Gospel. They have prominent mention of the Quran. The Quran also mentions the Psalms of David. So let's get a brief introduction to what these are, because in order to understand what the Quran is talking about, we need to know what these scriptures are. Otherwise, we get all mixed up. The Quran makes mention of the Torah. Now, there's a book called Torah, still in the hands of our contemporaries today. They're basically the first 5 books within the larger collection called the Bible. The Bible itself is divided up into 2 portions. There's an Old Testament and the New Testament, at least in the Christian Bibles. Now, in the Old Testament, we have some 39 books, or 46 in the Catholic tradition. The first 5 of these books is called the Torah, and that is said to be the Torah of Moses. Is this the Torah that the Quran is referring to? Well, sometimes, because sometimes the Quran is talking about the book that people have in their hands at the moment, and that's called Torah. But sometimes the Quran is also talking about the book that was revealed to Musa alayhi salam, the prophet Moses. So are the two the same? Well, not necessarily. One of the oldest copies we have of the Torah is the Aleppo Codex, which dates back to about 1,000 years ago, which would mean some 2,000 years after Moses. But the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the caves of Qumran on the bank of the Dead Sea, which is now within the occupied West Bank in Palestine, those scrolls show a high level of concordance with the present copies of the Hebrew scriptures. So we can have confidence that up until the time of the Qumran scrolls, which was about 2,000 years ago, the Bible was about the same from that time to the time that it is now, at least when we're dealing with the Torah and the Psalms. But that too is about 1,200 years later than Moses, on whom be peace. So we still need to ask, how did the scrolls get from the writing of Moses all the way down to the Qumran scrolls? Was there some change, or was everything surviving intact? And this we cannot be absolutely sure about, but we can see that the present Torah describes the death of Moses. Said that in the last book of the Torah, called the Book of Deuteronomy, the death of Moses is mentioned, and the fact that he was buried and nobody knows who buried him. And since that time, no prophet has arisen like Moses. So this shows that this portion, at least, was written sometime after, perhaps even a long time after Moses had already died, and therefore it was not written by Moses. From a Muslim point of view, then, we need to make that distinction in our own minds, because sometimes the Quran is speaking very highly in praising the previous scriptures, especially the Torah, and that is most often, most readily, the Torah as it was revealed to Moses, on whom be peace. And then at other times, the Quran is speaking about the Torah, which is there in the hands of people, and perhaps alluding to some changes that may have occurred within the later editions of the scripture. So much for the Torah.
I think now we can talk about unbreakable chain, to remind people like why it's important to know that, yes, we don't have the Torah from time of Moses. Mm-hmm. And he stressed out this. He said, well, we don't have anything for 1,200 years. And it means, who knows if people change it or not change it, so we don't know. But we know for sure, and he said it in his wording, with his words, that the Torah from the time of Dead Sea Scrolls until today is pretty much the same. And basically that's what we need to prove the Torah never been corrupted, because Quran said so. And we have this unbreakable chain from the previous lecture. Mm-hmm. Greg, if you can just remind people.
Yeah, so basically, so keep in mind what Shabir is saying, is there's a gap of time. We don't have any manuscripts between Moses and the Dead Sea Scrolls, essentially. So you've got more than 1,000 years of a gap. So, but the problem is, for them, is that the Quran says that there is no gap in that time, because you've got what it says in Surah 544. So Allah saying, we revealed the Torah by which the prophets made judgments for Jews, so too did the rabbis and scholars judge according to Allah's book, with which they were entrusted, of which they were made keepers. So it's saying Moses received the Torah, then prophets after Moses used the Torah for judgment among the Jews. And as we talked about when we were looking at these verses, obviously a Muslim prophet would not tamper with the text because Muslim prophets don't sin. So they are reliable keepers of the sacred scripture. And so from Moses all through the prophets, and as we pointed out, places like Surah 287 and 5, I think it's verse 19 in the Qur'an, are affirming that there was an unbreakable line of prophets or messengers from Moses to Jesus. And then there was only a gap of time when there wasn't any after Jesus, from Jesus until Muhammad. So if there was always a prophet or messenger on the scene, according to Islam, from Moses to Jesus, then the Torah would not be corrupted in that 1,000+ year gap that he's talking about. And you can see verse 46 emphasizes that too. In the footsteps of the prophets, we sent Jesus, son of Mary, confirming the Torah revealed before him. So clearly, it's very clear. Jesus had the Torah in his time. And there's actually many supporting verses that we didn't even talk about in the previous video. Like, I'll just summarize like one verse, and you could look at the notes. I think it's 1912, right? That John the Baptist had the Torah. Mary also was
66:12.
66:12 as well. Like verse 12 is both at verse 12, 19:12 and 66:12. That they're basically submitted to and following, upholding the scripture, which for them obviously is the Torah at that time. And there's another verse even that says that Allah taught Jesus the Torah. So there's a lot of extra supports for the Torah in the time of Jesus. But here it is. He's following in that train of successive messengers that had the Torah. So there's really no room for this idea of corruption in that time. It's very interesting. Two more things I want to comment on, things he brought up is, so Shabir talked about sometimes the Quran isn't necessarily talking about the Torah in the time of Moses, because sometimes it's saying it's the Torah basically that's with them, or that was present with them in the time of Muhammad in the 7th century. Well, it's an interesting distinction to make. Obviously, the question is whether they would really be different. But when you think about that distinction, actually, it works against them if they're trying to argue that the Torah was corrupt in the time of Muhammad, because it's specifically the Torah in the time of Muhammad that the Quran is confirming or fulfilling. So why would it confirm something that would be different than what was given originally? I don't know. But the Quran is saying it's confirming that which is with you. It says in 241, right? Or in 291, or in many places it says the Torah that's in the 7th century it's confirming or fulfilling. So even if it wasn't saying it's confirming or fulfilling what's before, it's at the beginning, it's confirming or fulfilling what was present in that time. And we have that because we have manuscripts that predate it. There was another point. I'm trying to remember what the other point I was going to make. Can you think of anything you wanted to add?
To that matter, I think it's just you shared before with a lot of verses of the Quran, which basically is saying that Torah is reliable in the time of Muhammad. That's basically that's all we need, right?
Yeah.
So technically, the verse 43, as we read it here.
Right.
So this is essential. That's a summit of all our conversation, and I remember showing that verse to Saudi students, Arabic speaking, of course, and they read in English and they want to read in Arabic, and they look at me with a confused gaze, like whenever, like how we missed that part, right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't study. Of course, they don't know the Bible. They don't know the Torah. All they know about the Quran and teachings of the Muslims, rabbis, we call imams, on mullahs, sheikhs, ulema, whatever, right?
Yeah.
So that Muslims rabbis say to the constituency, like, don't trust the Torah, it's non-reliable, forget it, don't read it, and whatever, right? So, and then they actually going against their own Quran, which is like, it's bizarre. But the first time I realized that, I was quite upset, I think, with them, and I was a little bit, I won't say I was angry, but I was kind of, I need an answers from them, and I came out with guns blazing with a lot of printed pages from the Quran about Torah, asking me questions like, how dare you say the Torah was corrupted when your own Quran had no problem with it,
right?
In terms of Muhammad.
It seems really funny that they're so quick to jettison what is so clear in the Quran about the reliability of the Torah. So the other thing I thought of, the other thing I forgot before. So Shabir mentioned specifically what he thinks was a change, right? So he thinks what was changed from the original Torah was the fact that obviously Deuteronomy, when it describes Moses' death and Joshua succeeding him, another example would be when it says, Moses was the most humble man. Obviously, he didn't write that line. Okay, fine. But definitely he didn't write his death, right? So he's thinking, oh, well, obviously that's a change after. Could be even long after. Okay, well, fine. We accept that change anyway, because we think that Joshua and prophets afterward inherited the scriptures and added on because they continue to write, right? Like there's a continuous history from the time of Moses onward. It's not like there wasn't anything else, because in their mind they're not thinking about other scriptures. But we have the Tanakh, the whole, the Old Testament, not just the Torah and then Jesus. There's no big gap of writing. There's a constant writing. So obviously you're going to transition one to the next, but it doesn't mean you're going to change the contents earlier on. And what's interesting about that is the example he's using of a change. Okay, so you could say, okay, they added on at the end. Okay, fine. But did they go and change the details in the other stories that we're going to compare? None of that is thought of even by them, because they're not aware of it. They're not aware of all of these, like hundreds and hundreds, frankly, probably thousands of differences in the stories. And those are the things we're going to press. Moses' death, okay, who cares? Like it's not relevant to the issues that we're going to be bringing up. So what I'm trying to highlight here is, like, that's the way they think. They go immediately to that, and they're not even really cognizant of the depth of the real problem, which is that there are so many differences, it really cannot be reasonably explained that all of these kinds of things would have been changed, even in 1,200 years.
And I think it's very interesting. They insist, the rabbis, if I could call Muslim rabbis, imams and mullahs and ulems and all those guys, right? Especially Dawaist guys. They insist that the Torah must be corrupted. Must be corrupted. And the reason, like, they don't give much of the details, except, for example, detail of the death of Moses, right? As you said, they always jump into that. Like a few other stories, like story of Lot and story of naked Noah and so on, right? They jump into the story saying, try to discredit the written Torah, which we have. And the reason is very interesting. Like, why do they really hold on to that position? And I think it's by itself, simply because we could see they're holding on to the position and saying like mantras, the Torah was corrupted, Torah is corrupted. It's because that if the Torah is not corrupted, it will be end of Islam.
Yeah.
By default, there's
nothing. That's what is one of the real pillars.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it means we are on the right track. So all we need to do is, instead of talking a lot of different subjects, all we even going to focus on simply on proof to the Muslims that the Torah was never been corrupted since Dead Sea Scrolls, and since the Quran is saying there is a Torah of Moses from Moses to the time of Muhammad, overlapping the Dead Sea Scroll time and time of when Septuagint was written as well, which is before time of Muhammad. That's all we need to know, because otherwise, if the Muslims still insist that Torah was corrupted by the Jews, let's say 500 years before Jesus or 1,000 years before Jesus, whatever, right? They, by definition, by default, they're blaming the author of the Quran of lack of knowledge.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm telling them, right? So you're more knowledgeable than Allah, and you're smarter than Muhammad? Really? You insist on something they both agree, and the Torah was not corrupted, but who are you to say it's otherwise? Are you a Muslim? Really? So that's the way sometimes I could press on somebody who's really stubborn. But now I want to transition into the book which we purchased and got, each one of us, in PDF format and in physical book format.
Oh yeah.
Which is the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible. I think that's most amazing book. I highly recommend everybody. Well, you should have it. If you're going to use that method, you should have it with you.
Yeah.
Dr. Muslim. If you do online, you're going to have a PDF, right? But
Yeah.
if you listen, you can have it in the physical one. And you want to say something?
No. I just agreeing.
So yeah. So basically, it explains the text, that how we can read it. And let me show you that example of that page. For example, when I have a brackets, square brackets, within square brackets, if text is missing, have you seen? We seen before the picture of the text of the page, which is have holes in it, and some parts of the text was destroyed. That was this text is not in a hole, basically, right? So they put in the brackets. As we see, if in the italics, it means it is changed somewhat. It's different.
There's a variant. There's a difference.
The variant, exactly. Yeah. That's a good word.
Yeah.
We have a triangle. It means that a large part of the text is missing. So the page, like we have a page 1 and page 3, but not page 2. So at the end of page 1, we can see triangle. And also it will, also here in this page, you could see that how many, let me blow it up a little bit. So you could see.
I can't see, it's very small.
Yeah, it's hard to see. But anyway, so when you get the book or the PDF, you can see it, how to read it. It's basically explain where it is, in which case
how it's different. Yeah.
Yes, how different it's, because this book compared Masoretic text, Dead Sea Scrolls, Samaritan Pentateuch, and Septuagint. Yeah. So that actually, the Muslim should be, should be. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say it might be worth just taking a minute at most, like just to explain quickly what those are, because some people may be watching it and not be familiar. So the Masoretic text, or sometimes it's short form MT, stands for basically the Hebrew manuscripts that we have. I think those go back to about maybe the 8th century or something, starting around there and a little bit later, with the Masoretes, who were Jewish scribes who developed a certain vowel system and marking system. And so the manuscripts from that time forward, that's basically what, when we read from the booklet, the sentence that said that the Dead Sea Scroll, the copies of Genesis and the Dead Sea Scrolls are extremely similar to the traditional Hebrew text. The traditional Hebrew text is the Masoretic text. So that's like the stuff we had that was oldest before we discovered the Dead Sea Scrolls. And so that's MT, and then and that's Hebrew as well. You've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then you've got the Samaritan Pentateuch, which is kind of interesting. Its origins go back to, I think it's the 2nd century BC. And that is a Pentateuch, so it's the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And there are some slight differences, intentional changes in a couple of places, at least. Not like all over the place, but because the Samaritans deviated from essentially biblical Old Testament religion in what the Old Testament teaches about the location of the temple. And so they basically modified it to fit where they believe the temple should be, on Mount Gerizim instead of Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. but otherwise they have a Torah, a Pentateuch, and so sometimes there's differences. And then also the Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translations. Technically, there are multiple translations that go by the label Septuagint. And in ancient times, into Greek, from the Hebrew into Greek, and those date back to the 2nd or maybe 3rd century BC, and the furthest back they go in terms of when they were originally translated. So we've got various manuscripts of all of these. Basically, they represent not just one manuscript, they represent a whole tradition, like a whole school of manuscripts that are being compared. So when there's a difference between, in the Dead Sea Scrolls Bible, when it says there's a difference between, let's say, Exodus chapter 2 on something, which we might show you an example of that in the italics, it'll note it in the footnote and explain to you what is the difference compared to these other ones. Yeah.
Okay, so that's how the page looks like. I'll just try to show you in this. For example, that's beginning of Genesis.
Yeah.
As you see, it's in the brackets. I'll just try to highlight you.
There's a lot of text in brackets and some in it.
Yeah.
Actually, you know what? If you can pull up can you pull up where you had a picture of a manuscript? You had like one toward the beginning of the slide on slideshow.
You mean?
Sorry, I'm not meaning for you to. Actually, even just that, but like if you look on the right side, you can see it. Okay.
You're talking about this?
Or this? Yeah, that's a good one. Actually, that's better. So what I wanted to say is, even though there are, so you can see in this manuscript that there are places that are like missing. It's disintegrated or fallen apart. So, but what's interesting is that scholars, when they put in the brackets and then they put in text in the brackets, they are not doing that without like good reason. So how they're able to think through what, and obviously there's conjecture to some degree because we don't physically have what's in the gaps, but only so much can fit in the gaps.
Yes.
Right. So, and if you zoom back out again to the full picture of it, you can see kind of like there are, in some cases, like on the left side of that page, you can, or like of the text, not really a page, but of the material, there's a margin. Okay. So it doesn't keep going. So basically roughly where the end of the line is. And if you have it at the beginning of the line, or you can even you can figure that out based on if you have a full line or you have even the ending of multiple lines like you have here, you can figure out based on what we have in the other manuscripts that are full, if it's matching everything else, and if you can fit what's in the traditional text into those gaps, and it measures perfectly fine, obviously that's what's there.
Yep.
Right. And what they do is they will take the samples of because this is handwritten, right? So you have to take samples of each letter that they find in the text, and they're determining on average the size of the letters, and then they can just measure it out how many letters can fill in the gap, right?
Yeah, and the gaps
also. Yeah, so it's actually very significant. Even though we might be missing a bunch of things in gaps, you can really tell what's there. Okay, it's unreasonable to say it's like something totally different, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to explain that because when you see a bunch of gaps, it doesn't mean that we don't really know what's there. We're quite confident that we know what's there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Let me go back to this the same slide.
But obviously, we're going to like emphasize what is not in the gaps.
Yes, exactly. So we actually will show you what's not in the gap. So it's, I don't know, more than 100%.
Yeah.
Correct, and it's proved the point.
I don't know how you can be more than 100%.
I know, man. 107%. I heard about 147% at once. Anyway, so that's from that one, we're gonna have about 10 examples to show you. why we can confidently say the Torah was never corrupted from the Dead Sea Scrolls up till today with factual proof of it. But also, which I will not show to now, it's what is significant for the Quran as well. We'll skip this part until next time, next lesson, other lesson, I should say. But now we're going to show you 10 points of, we could see how accurately preserved the text. For example, the first one is a tree of knowledge of good and evil, right? And that's found in Genesis 2. So I'm going to just highlight all which is missing, the holes in the narrative, holes in the books, right? They're all gone, right? But what we see here...
Did you say the holes in the narrative?
Yeah.
That's
I hope you watch this.
no, okay, we won't sidetrack with that.
No, sure, but
not that we even
I'm going to use the same.
It's funny.
Like we have also holes in the manuscripts.
There
I
you
think
go.
we should say holes in the manuscripts. That's a proper way to do it.
Yeah.
But whatever left over, right, it's this. But of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you should not eat, for that you eat from it, you shall surely die. Okay, that's very important. And of course, we have New Testament, Romans 5:12, which is talking about, and the death through sin came from one man. So it's basically New Testament based on the Old Testament facts. And these words came to us from a time before Jesus, basically. So it's like over, as I said, about 2,200 years. Next example, I will go for my favorite one by far, the daughter of Pharaoh. And again, we're talking about Exodus chapter 2 and the missing parts. And here are what the daughter of Pharaoh is mentioned. And if you notice, the one daughter of Pharaoh is actually variant. And in Masoretic text, it said she, referring to whom? To the daughter of Pharaoh. So this variant, it absolutely has no different meaning, but the same. And that's in exactly these verses with different translation in Hebrew, in Greek, whatever. It will be exactly the same, talking about the same story with the same daughter of Pharaoh in Masoretic text. But that's what you see. She, the daughter of Pharaoh, and this is Scrolls said the daughter of Pharaoh. Masoretic text, for whatever reason, said she. And we see the daughter of Pharaoh everywhere. So Masoretic text, Septuagint, and Dead Sea Scrolls, they all agree. They tell the story exactly the same way. And this phrase, the daughter of Pharaoh, it's appeared in all of them. But not only in all of the Torah copies, but we have New Testament copies. And everywhere, Acts 7 and Hebrew 11, we have reference to that event. And the daughter of Pharaoh have shown up again, surfacing again. So we can confidently say that Dead Sea Scrolls, Septuagint, Vulgate, Peshitta, Masoretic text, and all the modern day copies of the Old Testament and New Testament on the planet Earth, right? They all have the daughter of Pharaoh. There's no shred of difference. Now we go for another favorite story, which is
wait before you go there.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, so since that you use that example of a variant, so you have she, the pronoun, instead of daughter of Pharaoh. Okay, obviously there is no real change in meaning. There's no change in the story, like you said. So this is a good thing to keep in mind. If somebody's going to press you to say, "Oh, there's differences, eh?" Oh, I guess that means it's like unreliable. Well, then show them. Oh, yeah, there's little differences. Let me show you an example. Okay, and show them that example. So did that really change anything? No. Right? So that's, you can say that's basically the kinds of things that you see in these differences. It's not, that's not to say some things aren't more important than that. Yeah. Fine. But that's basically the kind of thing that you're going to see.
And also these examples, as I mentioned, they have very significant meaning when we bring the Quran in later on. But for now, I'm gonna want to show you and equip you with the knowledge we can actually bring it to the Muslim, to his attention. The second example, actually third example, is the marriage of Moses, another favorite story of mine. So we're gonna blot it out, that verse 15 and 16. And here's a said, now the priest of Midian, which is Midian, has 7 daughters. Everywhere in the planet Earth, every Torah has 7 daughters. And the third example is Joseph the shepherd. We can read in Genesis 37 that Joseph was 17 years old, but 17 years old is not in the text, is missing. There's a hole in the text, right? But he was keeping the flock, he was shepherding the flock. That's what we're looking for. And this text is survived. So it's very important for the future discussion with the Muslim. Here's a Joseph and a wife, famous incident on Genesis 39. And here it said, basically it said, like she said, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled. So that story is all over the place in every single Torah.
Before you go on, go back. If you look down, the third line from the bottom. So she's saying, I screamed and called out, and he left his garment by me and fled and went out. So that the added went out is very significant too.
Sorry.
Yeah. No problem.
I tried to highlight in
No, it's fine. She says it's a few times in the text.
Yeah.
But yeah, these are key facts that in the comparison will be very relevant. So
yeah.
The
Road of Moses, part 1. Incidentally, I have a road that's very important. So the Moses and Pharaoh went for Pharaoh, and that's what he said. Aaron cast his rod before Pharaoh and before his servants, and the wise men and sorcerers, and they also, the magician of Egypt, did the same. So we see the sequence of events. The Aaron cast the rod before Pharaoh, and the magicians and sorcerers after that did the same. As we see, it's all survived in every single Torah manuscript. And then there's another one, part 2. Now talking about partition of the sea. God said to Moses, and you lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea. These words are everywhere in our Torahs. Again, here's another one. The rebellion of Korah. So we can see, like, I want to just read this part. And they assembled together against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, you have gone too far, for all the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why do you exalt yourself above the assembly of the Lord? So, of course, we have holes in the text, but have gone so far, the congregation are holy, every one of them is there. So it's basically telling us that the reason for the rebellion is because of they want to have prominent position next to the Moses. So they want the power, and that's written in every Torah. Now we deviate from a Torah, go to the Old Testament, to the Tanakh, and here's the story of Bathsheba. Very famous, and Muslims and Christians have sometimes talking about it, and Muslims try to tell Christians how come it could be in the Bible, how come that David, the prophet of Allah, could have committed such a grievous sins. Well, you can have your own opinion, but it doesn't change the fact that the text survived for over 2,200 years, and it stated exactly that she said, I am pregnant, because that's why everything started, because David slept with the wife of another man, so that was adultery, and she get pregnant. And
can you go back to where it shows what's in the blanks for a second?
Yeah.
So the woman verse 5, the woman conceived and she sent a message to inform David. So it's also like it's coming from her.
Yes.
I am pregnant. Yeah.
And then David sent the job saying, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." That's when it's all started, right?
Hittite.
Or Hittite, yeah.
I'm glad I don't have to do this in a second language. So
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. And the last example is Jonah. Story of Jonah is another favorite one of mine. I don't know, all of them are favorites, I think, like babies.
To most people, they're wondering, like, how on earth is this relevant?
Yeah.
Once you know the stories, you'll see.
Yeah, wait for it. It's coming. And the Lord God appointed the plant and made it to come up over Jonah, that might shade his head to deliver him from a discomfort. But then God appointed, what it said here, a worm at the morning rose, and as the morning rose on the next day, and it attacked the plant, so it withered. And then the sun rose and appointed sultry east wind, and the sun beat down to the head of Jonah, so he became faint and pleaded with his soul to die, and said, "It's better for me to die than to live." So in that very interesting story, we find very clearly in Tanakh, it said that God appointed plant to have a shade over Jonah, right? And then God appointed the worm to kill the plant. And Jonah gets sick after that. He fainted. And he complained to God, and God taught him a lesson. That was the reason for plant to grow in the first place. And again, as I said, it's in every single Tanakh, not even Torah, it's a Tanakh. Every single Tanakh on this planet in different languages, it stays exactly the same. So when the Muslims tell you, "Oh, there's a variant or difference," like, you know what, you show that, and later on we're going to show Quranic passage.
Here's a very significant variant there. I just looked it up. There it says first, on the next day.
Yeah.
Footnote 75 says the difference is on the morrow.
Oh my God! Yeah, that's
it's
great.
like on tomorrow versus on the next day.
Yeah, that's a big. I mean, honestly, I know Muslims who will actually spend 20 minutes talking about like the Quran using that passage.
Right.
Yeah. They will. I mean, they will say, "How come? It's impossible." I mean, Allah's word could not be changed by the pen of the scribe. Yeah, whatever. So, basic conclusion is for today's lecture is that archaeological discoveries of the last century confirm that the Torah was never been corrupted for the last 2,200 years, which include the time of Muhammad, his Quran, and his revelation, which confirmed the Torah in his time. That's all we need. We don't need to wait and hope maybe the original Torah with the autograph of Moses will be found somewhere, and then we engage with Muslims. No. All we need enough in even 1 year before Muhammad birth of Muhammad. If we find any Torah 1 year before his birth, that will be enough to prove that Torah is exactly the Torah of Moses, because in the Quran 543, 544, 546, it's saying about from Moses to prophets, to rabbis, to Jesus, and to Muhammad, the Torah was never been corrupted.
Yep.
That's all we need to know. And here's the last slide. My favorite picture. Anyway, I think that's all for today. And we're going to see you next time. Thanks for watching.
All right. Yep.
Okay. Bye-bye.